Three important developments affecting employers and employees have been published by Employment and Labour Minister Thulas Nxesi. It includes the draft bill, which looks at quotas for the employment of foreign nationals. It also looks at the introduction of digital labour platforms and managing exposure to COVID-19 in the workplace. To unpack this, Director and Senior Practicing Attorney at Kirchmanns Inc, Grant Wilkinson, joins us now live in studio. Thank you very much, Mr. Wilkinson, for your time. Now, firstly, obviously, it looks to me, and probably a lot of South Africans, that this right for the minister to look at the quota of different businesses in terms of how many South Africans they employ compared to foreign nationals is reaction to Operation Tudula?
No, I think it's something that's been put in play for quite some time and it's been discussed for quite some time. It's definitely not in reaction to the operation. There's inputs from business and labour and the relevant constituencies prior to eventually the implementation of this. It's still in draft format, obviously. Yes.
Still in draft format. It just looks to South Africans that the draft format comes at a time when this has been a huge discussion, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's been a discussion for quite a few years, actually. I think this is, the operation has obviously brought it to the fore, but it is not a reactive or responsive to Operation Tudula at all. No.
Will it work, do you think, having a quota in different sectors of business, letting them know as government how many foreign nationals compared to South Africans they're allowed to employ? Is that not going to drive, foreign nationals away from our country?
I think it's a balancing act between maintaining employment for South Africans, not hiring foreigners in positions of, hiring foreigners in positions of South African nationals, but by the same token also not driving away foreigners from us. There is a need in certain instances where there's a critical skills list, as you'll know, where there's critical skills, we can hire foreigners, but then there obviously has to be, as you'll know in the plan, a skills transfer plan to locals as well. We have to make certain that the environment is conducive to the creation of legitimate business and not driving away foreigners and foreign investment inevitably, especially in the current economic climate.
And this will obviously assist with our unemployment rate, our very bad unemployment rate.
It's one of the initiatives by government, yes.
Just very quickly, when it comes to the digital platforms part and managing around that, I know that there's a lot of people who say they have jobs on a digital platform, but then, there's rules now that are in draft form, obviously for now, but what is government essentially trying to do in, implementing, if they do implement those rules?
Well, I think the idea behind it is obviously regulating the relationship. I think if you look at electronic platforms, where I'm rendering services to or through your platform to a third party, if you remunerate me, if you control how much I bill, in essence, then you'll be viewed as my employer and I'll be viewed as a worker for purposes of this act. Yes.
And obviously that has to also do with SARS, I believe, being able
also
to tax.
Also has certain tax implications as well, yes.
Just to explain to us, how will this protect the employee and employer in terms of, me being employed probably on a digital platform? Obviously, it's to make sure that I am remunerated adequately.
Well, this is more aimed at the fact that for purposes of this act, the employment numbers, the quota that the minister is looking at putting in place, and obviously they have to rely on labour statistics, a proper labour inspectorate being able to enforce properly, etc. So there is a journey, it's perhaps not an event, but it's to make certain that the same levels of protection or quotas would apply on this particular platform.
Tell us more about the SARS COVID-19, draft in this particular draft that the minister actually released. What exactly, yesterday the state of disaster was done away with. I'm assuming there was a debate at some point that I thought was interesting, really, where people were saying, I have the right not to vaccinate, but employers were saying, well, then we have the right to tell you not to come to work because you're not protecting the rest of our workforce by not being vaccinated.
100%. It's an interesting debate and will continue, no doubt. I think at the moment, if we look at those particular guidelines, the code of good practice, if you will, that's of application as of midnight last night into today. As soon as the state of disaster was taken away, that became of application. What it does put in place certain obligations and responsibilities on behalf of employers as well as employees. As employer, obviously, you have to do, as a lot of the guys already know that's on this particular show, the issue around doing an analysis, a proper risk analysis of your workplace. Based on the analysis, you do a plan, obviously to prevent the occurrence of COVID-19 in your workplace, because you as an employer have a responsibility to make it a safe workplace. If you can show by virtue of your analysis and your plan that yes, you have to have compulsory vaccinations, then inevitably you could do so. There's processes of exemptions that you could apply for as an employee. You know that there were grants listed in the previous regulations and guidelines, which this does replace. But in this one, interesting enough, is that if there are certain reactions from a potential COVID vaccine, obviously you can go for medical assessment paid by the employer. If you say, look, I have this particular reaction potentially to this vaccine, my doctor says I shouldn't, you as an employer can then go, okay, well, go for the assessment, let's do this and let's check. And I think the CCMA, as well as the one labour court case that jumps out at me at the moment, have already put clear guidelines that if you follow a proper process, if you do analysis, if you have rules in play, and you have a little bit of a funneling type process, eventually it could be that, sure, there's a good reason why you're not vaccinated. Alternatively, accommodation, so accommodating the individual wherever possible, where vaccines are not required. And then obviously, if alternatively, dismissal, suspension, etc. And also, importantly, as a company, as an organisation, I can also have an admissions policy. That's the Hudico outcome of the Labour Court as well. Yeah.
How does the Labour Minister then ensure that business is, adhering to these guidelines? For instance, the new quota for foreign nationals versus South Africans. How does he make sure that companies account?
Well, I think, the rules are there, right? It's about implementation, and I think you have to read this particular policy together with your critical skills and also the fact that the ZEP has been done away with at the end of this year. I think with all laws in South Africa, a lot of our laws are in principle very good, but it's about enforcement. And I think so often we look at the Labour Inspectorate and say, well, you're not doing a good job enforcing it, as outsiders, perhaps not myself, but people who aren't aware of what the processes and protocols are. We have to make certain that the Labour Inspectorate is properly resourced so they can inspect properly and that they can go through and properly inspect. Because if you inspect properly, you have rules and regulations in place, people follow those rules, people get the necessary documentation, and you can check and test for it. As long as there's a flexibility around that to ensure proper business goes on and legitimate business goes on, I think it'll be a fair workplace in the country throughout.
Thank you very much, Grant, for coming to see us here on All Angles. That is, of course, Director and Senior Practicing Attorney at Kirchmanns Inc, Grant Wilkinson.